In this video, I'll demonstrate the forging of the bevels of a shinogi zukuri katana. The geometry of this blade is quite a bit more challenging than previous blades I've made on this channel, because instead of having a single pair of bevels that descends from the spine to the cutting edge, this blade has two sets of bevels, one that descends from this point to the cutting edge, and one that goes up from this point to the spine. The result is that the widest point of this blade is not the spine edge, but rather this part here. In lateral view, the wide part forms a ridge that runs the length of the blade. As it nears the tip of the sword, the ridge curves up and runs into the spine, forming a little flared out area on the spine right here. Now, forging all these bevels is tricky. One way to do it is to create the edge bevels by hammering first along here, then flip the tsunobe over and hammer this way. Then lay in the secondary bevels by hammering along here. Then flip the bar and hammer along here. One thing that's very important in all this is to only rest the edge of the tsunobe that you're hammering on against the anvil, and raise the other edge off the anvil. If you lay the tsunobe flat, you'll flatten out the ridge you're trying to create and ruin the geometry of the blade. I'll confess that the strength and accuracy of my hammering isn't great when hammering like this or this. And I know from experience that I can't make it all the way through a project hammering that way without flattening out the ridge in various places, which would mean that I'd ruin the blade. I'm strongest and most accurate when hammering this way and this way. And I'm only really good at raising the back edge off the anvil at the correct angle when holding it this way or this way. So I've come up with an alternative sequence for laying in the bevels that allows me to use my strongest and most accurate movements throughout most of the process, and only requires me to use my weakest and least coordinated movements briefly. What I do is this. I lay in the edge bevel by hammering from point to tang down the length of the whole blade. Then I flip the blade from right to left and I go back down the blade, this time from tang to point. Then I flip the blade top to bottom, and I go back from point to tang, laying in the secondary bevel. Then I flip it right to left and lay in the final secondary bevel from tang to point. This sequence has the advantage that I almost exclusively use this motion and hold the tsunobe this way. It has the disadvantage that the normal curving and bending of the bar that occurs during beveling doesn't get immediately countered by hammering on the opposite side of the bar, so a lot of straightening is required along the way. Still, I've found that this method produces amazingly good results for me, and I can't imagine doing it any other way. Let's watch the whole process unfold. This is my favorite part of any blade forging project. In the first 90 seconds or so of beveling, the point of the sword is developed. If you get this step right, your tsunobe immediately starts to look like a sword. If you do it wrong, especially if you flatten out the ridge, your only recourse is to cut off the point and do it over. Fortunately, in this case, it turns out beautiful. And here I continue to develop the first edge bevel. Now that I've reached the tang end, I'm forced to do just a little forging with motions that are weaker and less accurate for me. Now I work my way back down the blade, laying in the other edge bevel, using strong, accurate movements again. Notice how I hold the spine edge of the developing blade off the anvil. And once I reach the point end, I'm again forced to use weaker and less accurate movements. But since most of the forging has been done with strong, accurate movements, it's not really a problem. Once I've roughed out the edge bevels, I begin to work on the secondary bevels. Once again, notice how I'm careful to raise the other edge of the blade off the anvil so I don't flatten out the ridge. and once I reach the tang end, I flip the sword right to left and begin laying in the other secondary bevel. Once I get back to the point end, I've completed the roughing out of both the edge bevels and the secondary bevels, but the blade is still pretty rough. The cutting edge and spine edge wander all over the place, and the whole blade is covered in bends, twists, and curves. So now I go back over the blade one last time from point to tang, straightening everything out and prettying up all of my lines. Once the blade is forged as pretty as I can forge it, it's time to normalize and straighten it laterally. I don't show the normalization in this video. If you'd like to see what that looks like, I'll leave links in the description to a couple of videos in which I normalize other blades. Here I'll just show what I do between normalization cycles. While the blade is still way too hot to handle without insulated gloves, maybe around 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, I straighten out any remaining ripples in the cutting edge and spine edge. Then I normalize it again. Allow it to cool to 400 to 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and do it again. I repeat this process of normalizing and hammering until I see no bends, ripples, twists, or other imperfections. And here's the final forging. Observe the ridge running down the side of the blade. The only place where the ridge is indistinct is near the point here. I didn't do a lot of development of the ridge with a hammer here for fear of flattening it out. I'll develop the ridge in this area using files during the profiling step. Alright, that's the forging of a shinogi zukuri katana. In my next video I'll demonstrate how such a blade is profiled. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and share with a friend, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.